Thank you,
Awesome.
LCA, for joining us today. We've got a great webinar for you today. So there's so many people out there who are looking to take their business to the next level, looking to say, hey, I've got all these things going on. I need some ISA. I need some other help. I need some process. So today we have a great opportunity to talk about that. And we've got Michele, who is Director of Operations with Laurie Reeder's team, a very successful team in Florida. And then we've got Jessie, who is the CEO and owner of CallAction. It's a great integrated app. And I'm Brian Curtis with Curtis Realty Group and Creative Coaching and Consulting, and I'm also work very closely with Follow Up Boss. So without any further ado, I will let you know if you miss any part of this or it's so amazing that you feel like you need to watch it again, it will be on the LCA YouTube channel for us to catch up on. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass it over. I think we'll start with Jessie. Jessie's got some slides and we're going to kind of talk to that. So Jessie, why don't you get that slide deck, and I'm assuming you have the ability to share.
Sounds good. Let me make sure we are ready. All right, perfect. So let me put this into present mode. So I apologize if I'm looking down here. Oops, wrong.
Looks like I need to get a new picture. I think that picture's about 6 years old. I need to get a new picture to LCA. I don't look like that anymore. That's a much younger version of me.
All right. Well, I'm Jessie with CallAction. So, we'll jump straight into this in terms of, building a high producing ISA team. So we appreciate all of you guys in the audience giving us your attention out of your day. So that's super important to us. And we want to try and deliver as much value to you as possible. So a good place I like to start off is we need to think about the consumer journey. We're generating leads, and leads are nothing more than inquiries, meaning someone who has a question and submitted some information. They were willing to do an exchange of information with you to get an answer of some sort. And so we try and simplify what this journey is into its lowest common denominator, because when we start to think about it in this way, I think it's easier to organize your CRM in terms of stages. And you're also able to really focus the team on delivering value at each one of those stages as we kind of think about that journey. This is a framework that we kind of created. We use this with basically a lot of our customers, which is, we call it the icon process, which is we generate an inquiry. We're trying to get to the first conversation. That's usually the hardest part. And that's normally going to take multiple follow-up attempts, somewhere between 6 and 10. So these are your action plans that would normally appear inside of your follow-up boss based on that new lead stage of a lead coming in. Once we get to a conversation, we want to try and deliver value and make sure that we're answering the customer's question based on whatever they submitted, and not just doing pure interrogation. So not just straight LP mama, but we also want to answer some questions and deliver value somewhere in between that. And then once we have that conversation, there's typically going to be 2 outcomes. And for sake of simplicity of this conversation, we're going to keep it as hot or cold. Okay, so hot is whatever is hot for you based on your own business and whatever your format is. Cold is going to be everybody else. In the real estate space, for most people, what a hot lead is someone who wants to go out and look at property, someone who's willing to transact probably in the next, month or so. And everybody else tends to be quote unquote cold on some other longer time frame. And that's going to represent about 95% of your leads that you're going to generate generally. And then the important part of this is, because of that long-term nurture of those leads, because the vast majority of them are not going to be ready, we need to provide value and make sure that we have stages in place that we can kind of follow up with those customers in the future. Because as we make these loops around this icon process and check in the future with a nurture, which will then create another conversation, each time around this icon process builds more and more trust, and you become more top of mind and provide more value to the customers. So that's kind of a little opening. Michele, you want to talk a little bit about this, or Brian?
I mean, I'm happy to jump in and just to provide some context. My name is Michele Wright, and I'm the Director of Sales at Laurie, Finkelstein, Real Estate. As Brian mentioned, we are a team in South Florida, and my first initiative when joining the company in September of 2020 was to launch an inside sales department. So we have been in production, an inside sales department, since January 1st of 2021, so almost 6 months. And I think it's important to provide that context so you understand where I'm coming from to talk about the journey that I've experienced when working with CallAction and Follow Up Boss. We migrated to Follow Up Boss about 4 months ago, and we were using CallAction when I actually joined the company. But the function of how we use CallAction now is going to look so different 4 weeks from now, 3 months from now, 6 months from now. So we have this exciting evolution that's taking place in our department where we're starting to really leverage the technology to help with our workflows and really accomplish our business goals.
So what I'd like to ask you, Michele, real quick is, so what have been the biggest aha? So you've been doing this for, let's call it 6 months for the sake of an argument, as far as having an ISA team in place, and everybody has preconceived notions. Some of those are right and some of those are wrong. So if you look back, January versus today, what's the biggest aha that you've had? Like, oh, we didn't know this was going to happen, or we didn't know that was going to happen, good or bad, so that you can kind of help people, because there's plenty of people out there who are going to start an ISA program, and they're going to, guess what? They're going to have the same issues that you are, whatever that, there's some pretty universal. So
absolutely, I love that question because there's been a lot along the way. And I would say that most recently, one of the biggest aha moments that I've had is really the concept around, you can't prioritize everything, right? It all can't be the same priority level in the business. And sometimes you have to go slow around the things that are really, really important to go fast. And we have started to slow it down and become very strategic around what we're implementing and the changes that we're implementing with CallAction and Follow Up Boss in order to take a giant leap forward. And a lot of that has to come back to, you have automation, you can switch a button on and you have automation, but if you don't know why you're doing the moves that you're making in your business and you're setting up that automation and you don't know why you're doing it and you don't know how to do it manually, it's not going to necessarily achieve the same business goal that you're really looking to achieve. So slowing down to go fast. And for us, this is around knowing how to do things manually before we turn on that automation button.
Yeah, I love that. And I think so many people use automation in place of relationships. So, for me, one of the things I've taken away from some of these other webinars, and Jessie and I talk quite a bit, is yes, automation is amazing, but at the end of the day, we still have to build relationships. And the purpose of technology is to build a relationship, not substitute the relationship. And I love to go slow to go fast. Too many people try and implement 27 things at a time, and then you have 27 things badly implemented. So, I love that approach, and thank you for sharing that insight. It's not always great to share your failures, but we've all had them. So, we appreciate that. So awesome. Well, let's kind of move forward with a little bit, looking at the ISA. Jessie, I'm going to pass that back to you, and let's take a look at kind of our next idea as we move forward here.
Sure, no problem. So let me go back to find that slide. Where did it go?
We're all very tech people, as you can tell.
Yeah, always the best tech people, right? So, all right, so we're back on it now. So the next kind of stage of this.
Hey, Jessie, you're sharing something, maybe a wrong
one.
There
okay. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Where did it go here? 1 second. Share screen. I thought I was on the right one. I apologize here.
While Jessie figures that out, I'm happy just to step in actually and say one of the major business changes that we were able to utilize CallAction for was to start to separate our lines of business through a broadcast line. And it sounds so simple, and that's because it is. And CallAction has allowed us to separate all sources of business, whereas before they were all kind of filtering into the same lines. And we were, by by separating all the lines of business, we were able to accomplish a few things. We were able to look at who's calling. Is this a rental line? Is this a listing line? Are these mainly agents that are calling the office? And really identify the sources and ensure that the right lines were actually going to the ISA. So we have 8 broadcast lines, and of those, 5 of them actually go to the ISA. And when I say broadcast line, that means that when I turn the system on, whoever is on, when the line rings through the broadcast number, all those phones ring. And so it's first to the call, speed to the lead, and answer the phone. But going back to being able to separate all those lines and really evaluate who's calling, and does it make sense for the ISAs to spend their time answering, you know, these consumers, and really, where else do we want to invest our marketing funds? And we were able to accomplish that really quickly with CallAction.
100%. And I think, you know, right around that same thing, it goes back to this consumer journey that we were kind of talking about. So on that consumer journey, each one of those business lines will have a slightly different journey. And that's the important part of kind of understanding that, is that consumer journey, because when you can differentiate where it came from, then you can have that journey, the correct journey from the very beginning. And that is super important. And instead of spending time kind of trying to figure out where we're at and who are you and why are you calling and things like that, now you can have a very clear vision basically of your business. And that clear vision of your business allows you to create very clear workflows between your ISA and your agents, and gets all of the communication and everything else in line. So I think, you know, one thing that we've seen with a lot of the teams that we work with is people are like, I want to hire an ISA, but we don't know what's the right way and what's the proper types of ISA agent workflow relationships. So I created this slide just to kind of give you guys a generalized outlook in terms of the primary ways that we see each one of these workflows kind of happen. So you could have lead source, meaning where did the inquiry come from? This could be a Google local service call, as example, what Michele was alluding to a broadcast call, or it could be a sign call, or it could be, you know, online leads that you're currently generating. And so most of the time, those leads will either go from lead source directly to an ISA department, where the ISA is working through and building that relationship, and then handing over the warmer customers to their agents. We also see another workflow, which is lead source goes to the agents first, who are responsible to try and initiate the relationship with the customer. And then if they're unable to, the leads actually get passed back to the ISAs, who pick it up thereafter. And then we're kind of seeing this third kind of hybrid that's really popping up a little bit more now, which is ISA and agent kind of simultaneously carrying the same messaging all the way through and working as a team together to create a better experience for the customer. Because at the end of the day, that is the single most important thing, is how is that customer going to feel when we start communicating with them after they've made their inquiry and the first conversation that they're having with us. So I'll stop the slide share right now. And in that way, we can have a little conversation around this. Brian, anything you want to add in?
Yeah. So, you know,
coaching experience?
I love what you said, that, you know, that third thing, because here's the reality. I feel like a lot of people hire an ISA because they don't want to make phone calls. Let's just be honest about it, right? I fell into that category. Hey, I'm really good at showing property. I'm really good at going and listing. I'm really good at all these things. I hate making phone calls. I'm going to hire an ISA. Well, that's great. And there's value in that, but understanding that, and I know we're going to talk a little bit about this as we move forward, is the idea of how do we make that transition from the ISA to the person who's actually going to go out and service that person. I think that's a very important concept as we move forward, and understanding that, really, don't take this the wrong way, all your ISAs out there, the client don't want to talk to you. So it's why. So why do we have that department? We want 100% answer rate. You know, we talked about Google. I'll say that's one of the important things about Google. I'll say is 100% answer rate. We've talked about the idea of, you know, we want to make sure that everybody's getting answered right away. That the speed to lead. So an ISA covers that. But at the end of the day, the agent is still the one who has to make that relationship work long term. The ISA is going to set it up for you, and what happens next is all about you. And sometimes we don't need the ISA. You give me a direct sign call lead and I'm able to take it, great. I'm going to take that lead, go and convert it. If it gets to the ISA because I was out showing property, great. So understanding, I think one of the things is you build your ISA team out. What is the purpose of your ISA? Is it incoming? Is it outgoing? Is it both? And I think that's a great thing that we need to look at. And the beauty of using these two systems that we're talking about together, Follow Up Boss and CallAction, it allows you to design it for whatever works best for your business that way.
Yeah, across whatever marketing channel it might be, calls, texts, or emails, as those leads are coming in based on the lead source so that you can have the correct, authentic conversation with that particular person. Michele, any kind of takeaways that you had from, you know, kind of going through your journey in terms of, you know, what that ISA flow is, and what do you think yours might look like?
Yeah, I think that we're going through a really exciting evolution right now. And you know, how we started isn't how it's going to look. But I like to keep at the core of, you know, any decisions that we're making is, what is the business goal? What is the business initiative? And for our team, what was the reason why we really needed to launch an inside sales department? And part of that, you know, in keeping that at the core is looking at protecting the business, right? You have suddenly an additional 7 sets of eyes looking at the business, and keeping people in their lanes. So just like Brian was saying, you know, getting the ISAs in their lane and the agents in theirs so they can do what they do best: convert, negotiate, drive business, those revenue driving activities, not necessarily nurturing a client for 12 months. And so really keeping at the core, you know, why we needed an ISA team to begin with and what we're looking to accomplish with it.
You know, I think for large teams, a lot of this is just, you know, protecting the brand, right? If we're the brand up front who's attracting basically people to your business, you want to make sure that the experience that they're having is conducive all the way through, that it is cohesive to what you want your brand to represent. So if we're going from, you know, the brand or the team is, you know, investing and generating leads and things like that, and then handing it off to basically an agent, we want to make sure that that agent can continue that experience and that the communication is consistent. You know, as much as we can kind of talk about Zillow or anything like that, Zillow, you know, tries to do this by doing their check-ins for the NPS scores and figuring out, you know, are we taking care of you, or are, you know, partners taking care of you? And those are important learnings that we can bring down into our businesses, because if that's a, you know, a Fortune 500 company, we can probably learn from that. And even though we might be small teams, we need to have that big picture thinking and continue that kind of jobs to be done to guarantee the best experience possible for the consumer.
Yeah. And you've talked about that, Jesse. The reason that Zillow Concierge even existed, what was the statistic? You've given it to me. I'm pretty sure it was like less than 50% of Zillow calls or Zillow leads were even called.
Yeah.
So,
the majority of the leads that were purchased, 50% of them were never even, you know, responded to, even though the agent was paying for those particular leads. So Zillow had to protect its own brand. Yep. Because if the consumer went to a portal and filled out information and nobody responded back to them, who's the consumer going to blame? Right?
They don't know me.
They don't even know who you are yet.
Yeah. They can't blame me yet. They will eventually, but they can't blame me yet. Right?
Exactly.
So, awesome. Well,
so
let's take a look.
That's pretty important.
Yeah, let's take a look at the workflow, you know, because you talk about that. You need to have a clear workflow as we move forward. And, you know, here's the thing, your workflow may change. You know, I think Michele's kind of alluded to that, hey, I got a workflow that we started out with January, and then we learned a whole bunch of stuff, and now we're going to do a different workflow. You know, there's always going to be things. And my experience is there's, you know, 6, 7, 10 different ways to run an ISA team. None of them are necessarily right or wrong. It's just got to be what's right for your organization. So let's take a look at a little bit of what the workflow is. And for everybody who's watching, please feel free. There's a couple of questions and we'll get those, but we will answer your questions. So please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A, and we'll make sure that they get answered. So, and
Yeah.
I'll ask as you're pulling up the slides, Jesse, I'll just
Sure.
ask Michele this question because it's one that'll be real quick. Somebody asked, how big is your current team?
Yeah, so my current team, I have 7 ISAs currently.
Okay. And how many agents?
We have 62 agents right now.
Okay. Awesome.
Full-time agents. And I think that's important to mention.
Yes. Yeah. No, and they run a very structured team. They're not, there's nobody slacking on that team. I know Laurie.
Not at all.
So.
Yep. So, we had kind of this original talk of like, what is the lead source and what does that journey look like? And what are the stages of that journey going to be? And I think we'll come back to this, but we'll give you kind of an example workflow that we can kind of make a reference to. So this is a super simple way to kind of visualize this. And when you start to think about it from this perspective and get a visual diagram of it, it'll be much easier for you to organize your CRM, to build out your automations, to figure out basically all of the branching logic that's going to take place. So I'll just kind of cover this really quickly. So we have a lead source at the very top of this diagram. Doesn't matter what the lead source is. You just need to know what that lead source is initially so that you can follow up initially in the correct format. And that's really important because if I get a sign call that comes in, I'm probably going to follow up with that differently than someone who filled out a contact us from my website. Those are 2 different types of customers, 2 different intents, 2 different types of questions. So first, we want to be able to track the very top of the funnel. What is the lead source so that we can categorize the customer correctly and start a communication with that customer, a communication outreach that is going to make sense based on what their inquiry was, because they expect us to know who they are and why they made that inquiry. So if we talk to everyone the same, nobody wants to feel like they're just a number. They want to feel like you are talking to them. So this is really important to begin with. So our initial workflows are going to be designed on the lead source, and we're just trying to get to a response. Can we get them to reply back to us, or can we get into a conversation with them? And really, there's only 2 things that are going to happen there. Is either you are going to talk to them or you're not. And you need to have a plan for both. But we'll kind of follow this path, assuming that we're going to have a conversation with them. And this is normally where the ISA is going to initially have that conversation with the customer, build the relationship, start to warm up what the experience is going to be, what to expect, maybe pre-qualify the customer, make some recommendations, and really try and find out, based on your workflow, are they qualified or not, and what that next stage of that consumer life cycle is going to be. Are they going to be handed off to an agent because they are qualified? Or are we just going to be in information gathering and we're still going to give them to an agent so the agent can maybe provide them some consultations? Or if the ISA is holding that lead and is responsible to kind of nurture that lead really long-term, maybe we're just going to dump it back into the ISA bucket and assign basically a follow-up process based on the outcome of that conversation, because the outcome is going to be either hot or cold, kind of a yes or a no. Now, where we've seen some gaps in the past is ISA warms up the relationship, says, yes, I got a hold of the customer, we give it to the agent, and then it falls flat, right? We don't have that kind of pull through. And this is where Zillow, and I'll use them as an example because they had a concierge service, which was basically an internal ISA department. Yep. And they were struggling there. And so they've made this transition over to, live transfer phone calls. You're seeing Google kind of do the same thing where they're trying to get the agent talking directly with the consumer in near real time as possible and remove some of that particular friction. So you want to make sure that you have a process in place to hold agent accountability. Once you've handed off that lead to an agent, let that consumer know what to expect. We like to call it a MAP. And a MAP simply stands for, it's an acronym for a mutual action plan to achieve the next destination, to get to the next stage. So if we create a map of expectations, for both the consumer and basically SOPs for your agents in terms of minimum service levels and things like that. Now everyone is on the same journey, has the same expectations, and things are not going to fall in between the cracks. So you want to make sure that you have some kind of process built in place there. And then there's going to be the final outcome. Did the transaction close or not? And if it did, great. Now, the agent should be nurturing that relationship kind of long-term on their own, because one thing about lead follow-up is that it's infinite. It technically never ends, because the majority of our business is going to come from our past clients in our sphere of influence. And on that note, this first conversation is really important, because if we try and deliver value from the very beginning, from quote unquote leads that we get, if we deliver value and nurture that particular customer and provide them guidance on how to achieve their goal, they all become your sphere of influence, because you've provided enough value from the very beginning. And that's where you get an exponential growth from the leads that you're buying, and you're able to grow your business at a really high level, just like Michele's team has been able to do. And if they're not going to close here, then we need to drop them back into a separate process to nurture that lead again until we get it into another conversation and we requalify or create a new map based on where that customer is in their journey on achieving their destination. So I will stop a screen share here and we can kind of talk a little bit about this as well.
Yeah, one of the things I'd love to hear from you, Michele, and I'd be happy to share what we do as well, is so when you get that conversion, if you will, that the response, and it's a positive response, and you go down the right-hand side of that graph, I feel like a lot of people mess this up. And so what am I doing, or what specifically is your team doing to get the transition from the ISA to the agent? Because that's a critical thing. Again, they didn't call to talk to an inside salesperson. They called to talk to a real estate agent. That was kind of their expectation on a lot of these leads. So what are you doing to ensure that relationship it happens, and it happens in a way that's a good way for the consumer? Because I know there's a lot of people going, oh crap, I don't want an ISA screwing up my leads. So what kind of things are you doing?
Yeah, absolutely. And part of how we operate on our team is the ISA is a business partner to the agent, and the agent is a business partner to the ISA. So that cohesiveness was a decision that was strategic that we made for our team. And that was, so we have, as an ISA department, we're going to be supporting and being either running the conversations or more on the behind the scenes with every single client. Now, what you're asking right now, Brian, is probably what I'm just so fired up about working with Jessie and our account manager, Jennifer at Follow Up Boss, is because we have been doing this so manual. And now we are at the point where we get to introduce CallAction, and specifically the ISA handoff campaign is what we're going to be introducing, because up until this point, we have been doing it very manually. What I mean by that is we have an SOP that we follow. ISAs are manually checking in on the clients. They're reaching out to agents, and everything has been very, it's been time consuming, and
Sure.
This is part of the risk to our business if now we don't start to evolve with the volume that we're working with to put something in place that protects the business and also circles back to the client to make sure that that level of service stays consistent, and they're working with either the agent or the ISA based on where they're at in their timeline. So admittedly, we've been doing this very manual, and now, we're starting the process of moving towards the ISA campaign.
That's great. And I think that's in a very important way. I mean, I love what you said though. And I think this is smart for all of you who are listening. One of the things that Michele's team does is they do everything manual before they automate it. And the reason I believe that's true, and I'm making this up, so correct me if I'm wrong, is because if you can do it manually, then I can figure out how to automate it. I understand the process. If I skip straight to automation, I don't really understand what's happening. So we do things manually, we practice, if you will, and then we're going to start doing the automation to get them moving forward. With that in mind, I love what you said this too. Our agents and our ISAs are partners, is what you said. So I'm assuming, and we didn't talk about this either, I'm assuming that your ISAs, at least in part, get paid commission, right?
They do. So how we have it structured right now is everybody is getting paid on the same common goal of closing. So when the agent gets paid, the company gets paid, the ISA gets paid. And there are different comp models out there, and that's not to say that we're not looking at potentially adjusting ours. But truthfully, we need the technology of CallAction and Follow Up Boss in place to adjust any sort of comp model. So right now, how everybody's, business partners, we're aligned to the same common goal. We're working to achieve the same thing. And that business partner, again, was a really strategic decision because we communicate with the clients that we're going to introduce you to our business partner. That's the agent. And the agent then references the ISA as their business partner. Oh, I know you've been in communication and you let my business partner, Jessie, know that X, Y, and Z. And so there's a cohesiveness that, going back to what Jessie had mentioned, of setting the tone from the very beginning of what you can expect when working with our team. And it's cohesive, whether you're working with a transaction manager, the agent, the ISA, you're going to expect and receive the same level of 5-star customer service across the board.
And
go ahead, Justin.
I was just going to say, the words matter, right? So just the simple rebranding of like the person that you're dealing with. I saw someone in the comments said, nobody wants to get handed off and people want to talk to the person that can make the decision. So if we call everyone partners in the business, there is kind of no levels per se. And so you kind of create this flat kind of org, or at least a perception of a flat org, and that they're going to get the same level of professional service across the board. And it's that service or that experience that the customer is going to remember at the end. The more that you can forecast what the experience is going to be to let them know what's going to take place, the more that you can remove basically emotions from the transaction, right? You can give them certainty in terms of what's going to happen. If we use maybe like Uber as an example, Uber, the certainty that you get to watch like your car coming towards you makes you comfortable, right? So if we forecast, by saying our partner, Brian, is going to take care of you here, and, you can expect basically a conversation from him within the next day or so. And if you don't hear from him, I will be checking in as well, just to make sure everything is going correctly. It's that level of professionalism that creates an amazing experience. And because we live in an experience economy, that's what they're going to remember at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And I want to talk a little bit more about this partnership concept from the concept of accountability. So, all of us use Follow Up. Well, Jess, you're not a real estate agent, but I use Follow Up Boss, you use Follow Up Boss, your team does. And that's our hub, right? That's where everything happens. And that's where everything. And here's what I think is cool. And I'd love to hear some experiences about this. If I'm in Follow Up Boss and on the ISA, I can check on my partner. My partner can also check on me. And here's the great thing about it. Every single human being, if they're honest, who's a real estate agent or ISA, they've had a bad day. They've fallen off. They've done something wrong, but we've built in a redundancy here. And is an ISA model perfect? Absolutely not. But how about we make sure that we never drop a ball, because there's multiple people in that system. And that's the beauty of Follow Up Boss and CallAction together, because it's an embedded app. And those of you who don't know what that means is ultimately, I don't even have to log into CallAction on a daily basis. I can do everything in Follow Up Boss right there. And that's what I love about it now that it's embedded, is that I've got my Follow Up Boss is my hub and everything is there, and I can trigger anything I need to do without having to log into a third-party app, which seems like, it shouldn't be that big a deal, but it's one more layer, if you will, to keep people from doing that. So how is the accountability system working for you, Michele? Is that something that's really been beneficial for you and your team?
Oh, absolutely. And the department, having an ISA department, as I mentioned before, now I have 7 sets of eyes on the business in ways that we didn't have that before. So if there is an issue, which it happens, who are they going to? They're actually circling back to the ISA, who is their first point of contact, that created that impression and that level of professionalism that they were comfortable enough to circle back to the ISA and reach out. Because how our handoff is critical to keeping that level of communication between the client, the agent, and the ISA. And each person knows what lane they're in and when they need to be in that lane. So with accountability, Follow-up boss and call action, as what Brian was mentioning, it's beautiful. It's beautiful because you have a complete view of what's happening in your business, and it's all together. And so we have ISAs as a collaborator when they book the appointment, and the agent in the agent role. And that allows them to follow up with each other, either post notes, ask for follow-up, or we have visibility into seeing the text messages, the calls. We can listen to the calls, understand, what the next step is with that client, and it's all in one single place.
Yeah,
yeah. I think something that's important in that, is this concept of time, right? Because we're all going to get busy, because if we do really good follow-up, it's going to create lots of tasks. So when we can remove the redundant items like data entry, writing notes, what was said, so on and so forth, that's going to create more free time to focus on the relationship and the conversations that you're actually having versus the task. And it's kind of the difference between busy and productive. And we want to make sure that, your people, from the ISA communications to the customer and from the agent's communication, that everyone is being productive and not necessarily busy. And that's where automation is going to come into play. Once you know that your workflow is nice and tight and everyone knows what to expect, then we can remove the redundancy of the physical task. And that's when we should apply basically automation. Is you want to automate the simple things that take a lot of times, not the complex things that require human intellect and skill to interpret. So
awesome. Well, I want to just make a quick, kind of administrative announcement. So those of you watching on Facebook, you can see in the comments, through LabCoats today and Follow Up Boss, they're offering a free 14-day trial. So obviously, we've all talked very good about Follow Up Boss. We love Follow Up Boss, but don't take our word for it. Try it. It's a great opportunity. You can literally try it for free. It's a great thing out there. And I say we've got about 7 minutes left. If you guys don't mind, I'd love to answer a couple of these questions that are out there. I'm going to start with the first one. Is there an AI system that you like as good as hiring an ISA to respond and nurture leads? So I'd love to hear from either of you what you think about an AI system in comparison, I guess, in contrast to an ISA.
I can kind of talk a little bit about it. AI, I think, is really good for simple tasks. But when you're dealing with human emotions, that's not a simple thing. And conversations are complex because if you're trying to have someone understand what's taking place in that conversation, it's the difference between hi and all uppercase, hi basically with a couple extra I's at the end, like if you're just looking at text, or hi with a smiley face at the end. There's lots of different complex contexts just from the way that something is said or spelled. So I think that humans are the category leaders here, and what we should do is we should use automation to automate the task, not try and have the actual conversations. If there's some basic intake stuff, that makes sense. If you're just trying to generically qualify customers and figure out, timelines and things like that, that AI will be super powerful. But here's an interesting stat. Google, the little search bar that you see there, every year does a study and they release this information out there. And so if you think of like that little search bar as kind of the window to the world, right? Because everyone, whatever they're thinking, they're going in and typing into that search bar. And you would think that after billions and billions and billions and billions and trillions of searches, that they would pretty much have answered or seen every single question that kind of comes in based on how the mind thinks. Well, the interesting thing is that Google releases this information every year, and about 18% of queries that they see every day, they've never seen before. And so that's why it's important, because a human can kind of look at the sum of the entire conversation and make some assumptions in there. And that's what human intellect is. A computer understands yes or no, zeros and ones. And it kind of goes back to that workflow that we have. So if your basic questions for AI are kind of yes, no based, totally makes sense. Lots of great solutions that are out there. Raya from the Ylopo team, who's partnered very in depth, directly with Follow Up Boss. There's Structurally, there's a couple other ones that are out there that are pretty powerful as well. Ray is definitely an awesome source for that if you are going down that AI path.
Awesome. So Michele, I'll throw the next question over to you. When the lead goes to no, in other words, you know, the ISA gets on the phone with them and they go to no, what's your process there? And I know you can't go to the entire thing, but just a general concept of what you're doing with the no.
Yeah. So, you know, what Jessie has definitely taught me is really understanding motivation versus ability. So really, what is that no? Is it no to right now? Is it just flat no? I'm already working with another agent. There are so many whys behind that no. And so that's where the human element comes into being able to pivot and have those conversations and do our best to convert. But we move into the nurture game and we set tasks for ourselves. Again, this has been very manual. We've set tasks for ourselves to circle back to that client, following up and calling back in. And now with the implementation that we're going to have, there's going to be a level of manual again, but moving towards automation for the no's.
And I'll add on to this. I'm going to give you a very simple answer. Based on their response, we put them on a call action drip. And I know that, I mean, I'm just breaking it down to almost the dumb or the simple. You know, you create somewhere between 6 and 12 call action drips, and based on that response, you put them on that call action drip. And now, you know, one of the things that Jessie and I have talked about at length is we can do outgoing calls, but here it is. It's 2021. It's not 2010. 2010, we had close to a 20% answer rate on outgoing cold calls. And when I say cold, interruption marketing, they're not expecting our call. Today, that's single digits. So I hate to say this, and all the people in the world who are big callers will call me wrong. It's not as effective to call today as it was 10 years ago. It's just not math. Yeah. So we need to find more ways to create incoming conversations. And if you can create enough incoming conversations, you can stop having initial outgoing conversations. So let the technology start the conversation and then you finish it is kind of my philosophy on that. So.
Yeah, you do the part that is, you know, the productive versus the busy. So outbound tasks tend to be busy. If we're having meaningful conversations on the inbound and providing guidance to customers, you know, that's the value that they're seeking anyway, and people are going to work on their own terms. iOS 13, when they released, you know, 2 years ago, the filter unknown callers, you know, I did a pretty big blog post talking about this, that, hey, this was going to change the game a little bit because it's going to make it even harder to get a hold of someone. And that's why creating these really clear maps in terms of telling the customer what to expect and connecting the dots, you leave off the unknown. This is the reason why we love GPS, right? Which is going to tell us where we're going. Well, that's kind of a human expectation now. We just need to build GPS into our business. Let them know where they're going and what to expect and how those conversations are going to take place based on what they're telling you. And everyone is going to have a much better experience. You'll take leads or basically new relationships and expand your sphere of influence. And what happens over time when you do this really, really well is that you can slow down in terms of having to constantly buy leads and get into the lead rat wheel, which is going to continue to get more and more expensive as time progresses, because all of the lead providers are working towards referral-based, you know, fees basically. So
yeah, awesome. So I've been consulted from on high, and they said that we can go over a little, and we've got a bunch of questions. So if Jessie and Michele, I would appreciate you spending a couple more minutes with us. I know we were going to stop at 45 after, but let's answer a couple of these questions. And we don't have to go in depth in these because the next couple of questions could literally be an entire webinar, but maybe some generality that you guys might share. Somebody said, how do you recruit ISAs? So Michele, what are you guys doing? You've got 7, so you've definitely had some level of success recruiting them.
Yeah, so we've had a very clear avatar when we first started out about who we were really looking for the role. That's actually changed. So what we were originally looking for was, oh, this is a stepping stone for people that potentially want to be agents. No. Now we are hiring people that are skilled salespeople that have a ton of experience on the phone, that have an interest in real estate and are licensed, and see an opportunity to join a fantastic growing operations within our company that they can help grow, develop, and lay the blueprint and foundation for a very new department in its infancy stages. So my avatar is changed, and I interview hard. I interview very, 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 very hard, because I want to go through that first, rather than, hire someone that's just not the right fit. So I interview really hard up front.
Awesome. And I think that's very important. And this is the one thing that I took that I 100% agree with. Not that I don't agree with the rest of it, but too many people have tried to use the ISA as the redheaded stepchild. Here's the reality. If you're going to run a complete ISA system and every single lead is going to talk to your ISA first, why would you make that person your least experienced and worst salesman in your organization, salesperson in your organization? That is ridiculous. Yep. And I'm sorry if I've insulted somebody by that, but here's the truth. This is not an easy job. It's a hard job. It's a frustrating job. There's a reason that agents don't want the job, because it's hard and frustrating. Do not put lower quality people in there to fill the spot. Interview, understand, and can compensate people accordingly. The ISA team that I built in Colorado, it was a big part of. Those guys are making over $100,000 a year. It's not a position that you pay $25,000 a year and hope that it works. If you're going to build an ISA team, they're just the same quality people as your good agents. It's just they have a different role. So, all right, what else we got here? We got tons. What are some lead sources that you all think are good to run through an ISA team? People ask what we're utilizing. And does that matter?
I mean, I think as long as you're very clear in terms of what the consumer journey is going to be, and whoever is going to have run point in terms of having the initial conversation with the customer, you want to make sure that they can answer, as many of the questions as possible. And I think this is where, what, for example, Michele's team is doing in terms of hiring licensed ISA, so that way they can answer the majority of the questions. I think that's super, super important. So the reality is, I don't think there's a limit to what you can run through. I think it's more so understanding what the journey is, and is the staff licensed or not, so that they can handle the questions that may come in based on the lead source. I think that's probably more important.
Perfect. And I'm going to answer that question. Obviously, Michele, Jessie answered the question, are your ISAs licensed? And then somebody asked, do you have any non-licensed ISAs?
Okay. I do not.
So I can tell you that I've done both. Both work. Jessie kind of pointed out some of the issues with working with non-licensed people. They can't answer all the questions. I'll just throw this suggestion out there. Licensed always works. Unlicensed, make sure that you're understanding what they can say, what they can't say based on your real estate commission's rules, because what's true in Colorado isn't true in Arkansas, isn't true in Hawaii, isn't true in California. So don't take a general statement from us. Find out, do that research, so that you don't call and say, well, Brian said that I could do this and it's okay. No, you didn't. So,
think of why the lead is making the inquiry in the first place and what their expectation is going to be. And I think that's going to really determine what you need to be able to do. Because if you think of like the most common questions that they're going to come in, it's kind of like scripting, right? If you hear no's, there's only so many no's that someone is going to tell you. And no, I'm not ready now because I'm in a lease. No, I have bad credit. No, I don't have this. Well, the reverse is also true, which is, I saw this house. Is it available? When can I see it? What's the school district? So on and so forth. So whatever questions that they're going to ask based on the lead source is probably going to be your best determinator, and, what the local laws are, as Brian kind of pointed out.
Cool. I'm going to answer two more questions because we're already over and I want to respect everybody's time, but we still seem to have quite a few people who are interested. So if you finish a full 12 touches, and I'm not saying 12 is a universal, was the question, without any responses, do you continue to nurture, and what does that look like? So, Michele, I'd love to hear what happens if you go through a whole bunch of touches and you've got no response. What's your plan after that?
Yeah, so it's exactly in line with what you were explaining, is that there's going to be, a drip campaign, and we're going to set an action plan for each client. And they'll have to go through that process. And then if we can get something out of them, then, that will stop the drip campaign and we can manually jump in and start triggering those conversations. But that's, we don't want to overcomplicate that aspect of it.
Absolutely.
If I could add in on that, I mean,
please.
You have to think that the average customer is anywhere between, 3 to 18 months out. So if you're 12 touches or the first 2 weeks, you're just kind of skimming the top in terms of, the number of people that you're actually going to make communication with, because you're just kind of looking for the hot and ready. What you need to try and do is maybe add additional touches, but slow the cadence down the longer that they're basically waiting.
Yeah.
So you can have a 50-step touch if you have no response. Just slow down the cadence on the back end of that. So maybe the first couple of days, you're a little bit more aggressive because there's a sense of urgency initially when they made the communication, and you want to make sure you're providing good service. But if after, some arbitrary number of no touches or an arbitrary amount of time, all you do is just extend basically the cadence back out and making reference to the previous follow-up that you were trying to do. So for example, let's say if your 12 steps are in the first 2 weeks, maybe you do a cool down period for a couple of weeks, and because maybe that person is busy, they're out on a holiday vacation or whatever it might be. But if you touch base, 3 weeks after, and you just make reference, going back to the original lead source so that they know why you're basically reaching back out to them, and saying something to the effect of, hey, a couple months ago you had made an inquiry. We're just kind of circling back in, see if anything has changed in your life right now. If you're closer to, your journey of becoming a homeowner, how can we help you? And asking those kind of questions, just slow that cadence down and just make it a lot longer process.
Yeah, and some of that automation that comes with that, I was just, I pulled up some of mine. I've got an action plan that's 1,368 days long, which pretty long. I've never gotten to the end of that one yet, because basically it stops when people respond. But here's my point. Step one starts 6 months from the day I activate that plan. And here's why that's relevant. Because if somebody tells me I'm 3 years out, I'm 2 years out, I can, but I shouldn't call them next week and ask them if something changed. We have to listen to what the consumer says. So the beauty of having these plans, and you can do that through Follow Up Boss and CallAction, or Follow Up Boss and CallAction together, is most people think step one has to start right now. Step one can start tomorrow, next week, 6 months from now, a year from now. So that's the beauty of it. Everybody should be on some kind of follow-up pattern. Even if I'm never going to buy a house again, great, I'll call you in 6 months. I don't say that, but I'm going to. So, understand that everybody is telling you what's true for them today, assuming they're telling you the truth. But I can tell you right now, I live in Colorado. If you'd asked me 10 years ago, was I going to live in Colorado? No, I wouldn't have done that. Why? My life changed. So if, understand that everybody's life changes, and it changes all the time. So anyway, I want to answer just one more question. I think this has been a great thing. I appreciate both of y'all being on, but let's just talk about some minimum expectations that you have, Michele, inside the system and for your ISAs. And I think that's a great thing to end on.
Yeah. So so we have, the ISAs have different goals. Just to give you kind of a high level, quick goal is, so when we first started out versus where we are now, each ISA is averaging anywhere from 60 to 100 appointments per ISA. Per month. Mm-hmm. Each ISA has a listing appointment goal. Each ISA has a contract goal. And we are, in addition to that, then there's speed to lead, right? So for every new lead that populates into their book of business, it's 2 calls and a text, 2 calls right away and a text. And that happens immediately with every lead that enters the system. And because leads enter the system differently, right? It might be a live call, but it also could be a nurture lead coming in via email or the system.
Awesome. Well, you answered that very quickly. So we do have time for maybe one more question.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at. Go ahead, Jessie.
One thing that you were kind of talking about, a little bit earlier in terms of that kind of concept of moving people from campaign to campaign and making sure that you created a map for what their future state is going to be, is that if you start establishing these kind of patterns, in the future, you're guaranteeing new conversations to come in without having to buy leads. And this is a very powerful concept. Like if I have 1,000 people or 2,000 people that are on some kind of nurture plan, and that you can predictively guess that in the future, 30 or 40% of those people will eventually come back and start a new conversation with you, you've already guaranteed yourself future 800 or 900 conversations before you bought a single lead. And that is a very powerful concept to grasp around. And that's how you can get a significantly better ROI on your business, and on the leads that you're generating.
Yeah.
I'm going to piggyback on a question for you. So 100 appointments a month, what is conversion? So do you have a feel for that? I know we're putting you on the spot to know all your numbers off the top of your head.
No, that's fine. Because we're actually going to start really utilizing Follow Up Boss for part of that conversion tracking. Admittedly, we have had spreadsheets. And so this has been a startup department. So we've had spreadsheets, and now we're moving towards being able to track everything. So we actually are going to be making some pretty big changes around workflow for the ISA when transitioning appointments, so we can start tracking that data. So we've been on Follow Up Boss for just over, I think, about 3.5, 4 months now. And I guess just to give you guys some numbers that maybe you care about is now, as of last month, the ISAs were associated with 80% of all team leads that were contracts that closed or under contract for the month of May. So it did not start out that way, but now, we finished May with the ISAs being attached to 80% of team lead contracts. So year to date, we're just over 220 contracts year to date for ISAs.
That's awesome. And approximately how many closings did you have in May?
We had, I don't know.
Oh, that's fine.
The exact number around
a lot.
closings.
I know Laurie's teams, you had a lot,
Yeah.
but so
we had over 100 contracts.
There you go. So, because somebody said, what does that really mean? I mean, you're talking about, 80% of those are coming in, you're having over 100 contracts a month. That definitely makes you one of the top probably 20 teams in the country. If I were to back and go look at real trends, there's not a lot of teams doing over 1,000 transactions a year. So that's amazing.
We finished 2020 with just 900, like right around 962 transactions units for the year. So we will exceed 1,000 for sure. And the goal is to have the ISAs, pure domination on all the team leads. And so we're at 80% now, and it's over 100 contracts a month that we're averaging.
Awesome. Well, let's do this. I just want to finish up at the exact top of the hour. So Jessie, any final thoughts? I'll let you give a final thought, Michele, after that.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's important. Think of the consumer journey, where the lead came from, what is their expectation, why did they make the inquiry? Map out what that looks like in a perfect world if that was your only customer on the planet, and how you'd communicate with them throughout their entire life cycle, not just from lead to first conversation, but from lead to first conversation to figuring out their why and their when, and then circling back, and maybe that next 12 to 18 months, what that journey is going to look like until they become a homeowner. And then what does the rest of the journey look like to continue basically nurturing that lead so that you can expand your book of business from referral and SOIs. Because if you're not thinking about it holistically from end to end, you're solving one little tiny point at a time. You do need to start somewhere, but you got to have the big picture and have some clarity first, because that's going to allow you to organize your CRM and all of your stages in a much better, clearer format that everyone is going to understand. Because if we have a clear map of where we're trying to go, everyone's going to be able to reach the destination and hit the goals.
Awesome. Michele?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just say, if you're starting an ISA team or you're thinking about creating one, really network and connect with other people that have already launched an ISA team, learn from their mistakes. I was fortunate enough to have a few people that I was able to interact with. And you, at the end of the day, still have to make the decision of what's best for your business. So there might be things that work for other teams that will not work for you. But truly network with other teams just so you can get a feel of how things are. And, if you guys, I'll put it out there, if anybody wants to reach out to me, absolutely. I'm happy to help and pay it forward, because others definitely helped me along the way too.
Absolutely. And I want to thank both of you for being here, taking your time today. And so a quick reminder, this will be on LCA webinar if you want to watch it again. So on the LCA YouTube channel, and also if you go back on the Facebook page, you can see the link to get a free 14-day trial to Follow Up Boss. I can't tell you, I've used Follow Up Boss since 2014, how instrumental it has been in my team. And now the integrations with things like CallAction, and there's probably about 5 or 6 other things that you can actually embed. It can really become your hub to be a great thing. Thanks again, everybody, for being here today, and feel free to reach out to me as well. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.